In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Change. One of the most feared and dreaded words in the church, and for many people. Change is especially feared when we are the ones in power, the ones with authority, or when things are going well for us. Of course, that doesn't really describe 2020 for a lot of people. This is a time when we have had to embrace change because it hasn't been a wonderful year. And I don't know about you, but my Thanksgiving was a tad different from the usual this year. And now we are entering a whole new season, a whole new year in the church calendar with new colors and prayers. We are in the season of Advent, the season of preparation for great change and reflection. And our readings today speak of changes to come, that must come. First, we heard from the prophet Isaiah and his lament to God. He was asking for God to come down from on high and to change things like God had done in the past. Isaiah recounted the history of God and the people of Israel. He spoke on behalf of the people and acknowledged that they had gone wrong and fallen into sin. But he also seems to somewhat hold God responsible for this, because God had hidden God's self from the people. And thus the people turned away from God and had done wrong. Isaiah pleaded to God not to become too angry, to leave open a path for forgiveness and redemption. Isaiah here is serving as a prophet, but also as an intercessor, a go-between for the people of Israel and God. He recounts the great things that God had done in the past, in particular the visible deeds of power that made God's presence known to all people. Isaiah is also acknowledging the sinful deeds of the people, recognizing that they had gone astray. But that is where things get a little tricky. It seems like Isaiah is either blaming God for not being more involved or visible, which led the people to drift away, or saying that the perceived absence of God excuses the sinful deeds of the people. Of course, Isaiah might have been speaking not for himself, but on behalf of the people. After that, he returned to the fundamentals and recognized God as Father and Maker of all creation. Part of Isaiah's lament is something that we are all quite familiar with and often struggle with. Where is God when we are suffering? Why do bad things still happen? The way that Isaiah speaks, it makes it seem like the perceived absence or silence of God is a judgment of the people. The people felt abandoned because God wasn't doing obvious, amazing, and miraculous deeds routinely. No parting of the waters, no manna raining down from heaven, no smiting of the enemies. However, God is still at work in the world and is with the people and in their times of need. God cares about us and our suffering, because we were created by God. Isaiah recognized God as the Father and Creator of all in this passage. He spoke of God as the potter forming the clay, us, into something new. We are being formed into something new, but we still have minds of our own and can go our own way. This is an ongoing process, not something that is ever really finished until everything is finished. We experience suffering not as a result of God's wrath, but because of our own mistakes, our own brokenness, and also the randomness of our existence. The goal of our existence is to do better, to be willing to be formed into God's servants. And part of that means being open to change and recognizing that we aren't the ones in charge. Speaking of change, today we move over to the Gospel of Mark. Jesus has arrived in Jerusalem for the last time and has foretold its destruction and that of the temple. His disciples have asked him when this will happen and what will the signs be to alert them. He told them that there would be cosmic signs and calamities, that the Son of Man would gather his elect from the ends of the earth. Jesus told them that the kingdom was coming in that generation. He said that all things were fleeting, except for his words, and that no one knew the timing of his coming except for God. All we can do is keep alert and stay awake. We begin our new church year with a vision of the end of all things. That might seem odd, but as a one-time presidential candidate once said, every ending is a new beginning. And in Advent, we prepare for the coming of the Son of Man, both for the first time and for his eventual return. This passage is known as the Little Apocalypse. Jesus is painting a vision of the end times, but we must not get bogged down in the details. He is telling his audience then and now that there will be an end to all things, and that the Son of Man will be there. Multiple times in this passage, it is made clear that we cannot know the timing of these events. So it is futile to attempt to do so. And yet, many, also many, have tried. This passage might seem to be filled with only gloom and doom, but there is hope. Jesus speaks of much suffering that will occur, but it is not the end. God will be there with the people, and in the end, God will win. God will reign supreme and make all things new. There will be deliverance from suffering and illness. God will wipe away every tear. Creation will be restored. And it will be good and right. Jesus is clear that we should not attempt to speculate on when the end time will come. But what should we do? Yes, obviously, we should stay awake and keep alert. But what does that mean? What else are we to do? We must wait, just as Christians have for 2 millennia. But this is no simple passive waiting. We are to wait with anticipation. We are to be active in our waiting. We are to conduct ourselves as if the end could happen at any moment. We must not put off to tomorrow what we can and should do today. We must keep busy, not simply look busy. We are to avoid the temptation to speculate about the fate of others or grow resentful of others. Our call as disciples is to do the will of God, not to take God's place. As we begin Advent, we are being called on to reflect on our actions and strive to do better. The prophet Isaiah reminded us that God is the one in charge, and that we must be open to being molded by God for God's purposes. And Mark's gospel reminded us that all things end, and at the end of all things is God, and God's above. Jesus reminded us that we cannot know God's timing, so we must use our time wisely. And throughout these readings and this season, we are being reminded that we are not alone. God is with us, now and always. And so, let us remember that our time here is fleeting. We are to use it wisely in service to God and one another, and to try to be a little more open to change. Because it will happen, one way or another. Amen.